If you're watching this on the day that it's published, the ROOT Homeland Expansion is live right this second on Kickstarter, GameFound. I don't know. I'll have the link down below. I've had the privilege of getting I guess it's a print and play copy of two factions. The Lilypad Diaspora, I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Diaspora.
And the Twilight Council. Both of these factions, I'm going to say right now, are going to disrupt your game state. It's going to shake up the meta. They're disrupting in different ways. They're both unique, and we're going to get into them right now. But before we do, a really quick note on this. These are both very much in development. The core principles and mechanics, I've been assured, are going to remain the same. Specifically, the cards in particular are very much up in the air right now, and you'll know what I mean by that in a second with my comments. Just know that these factions are going to be tweaked maybe a tiny bit or maybe a lot by the time they actually come to you, but I think I'll be able to communicate in general the big picture on both of these factions and why you should be excited about them or not. You never know. Oh, and one other disclaimer. I don't do a lot of Kickstarter previews or crowdfunding previews. Frankly, I don't really like to. I don't like to play with games and give you thoughts on them in short windows of time and unfinished products. However, I've agreed to it here because I love Leader Games. Leader Games is wonderful. Nearly everything's been a hit. And I say nearly because I haven't played Vast and Oath. Everything else I've played from Leader, I've absolutely loved. So just know that going in, I am a Leader Games fanboy. And while not paid, there is some inherent biases with certain companies out there. And this is one of them for me. So take my words with a grain of salt. So now let's hop right into the Lilypad
Diaspora.
They hop because these are frogs. Speaking of frogs, hey Kim, shout out in the Discord, just gave me an education on exotic frogs. Maybe I'll throw a couple pictures up here, and here. But man, there's some insane frogs out there. There's some creepy frogs out there, but they are also incredibly expensive. I need to get into the frog breeding game. So shout out Kim, members Discord. I appreciate that. But we're not talking about real life frogs. We're talking about the lovable anthropomorphic type.
Diaspora.
Yeah, it's an odd name that if you're educated to my level, you have never heard of before. So I had to look up the definition. And for the few of you out there that might not know what this is, let me tell you. Wikipedia says it's a population that is scattered across regions which are separate from its geographic place of origin. All right, so that makes sense because these frogs have been displaced from the woodland and they're coming back trying to peacefully reassimilate frog culture into the woodland. I emphasize the word peacefully because that is the way the frog culture tokens come onto the board. They really want to stay peaceful because on every single turn, once per evening, they can spend a matching suited card and score points for every single peaceful frog culture token in a matching clearing. This makes them incredibly dangerous right out of the gates to score big chunks of points, especially if they can get the right card in their hand. The second interesting wrinkle to these tokens are they add a second suit to the clearing when on their peaceful side. You might say, no problem, just battle them to remove them, right? Wrong. The frogs have an attribute called protective. And protective means when you try to battle them, that token automatically flips to a militant side. And in order to remove that token, you have to discard a frog card. And the rub there is frogs, they're not a suited card in the deck. And you're right. And they don't become a new suit in the deck. They have their own deck that you have to interact with to get a frog card in the very first place. In fact, the only way to get these frog cards are to reconcile with them. If you're in a clearing with them in a militant token, you can just give them a card, which doesn't sound that great, but you get to take a frog card out of their frog deck, which by the way, they can't use those cards themselves. They're just for you, being the enemy, of course, and you get to flip that token. Unfortunately, if it was militant and you flip it, now you just gave them a scoring opportunity. This creates an incredibly tough decision for the opponent and, in my mind, just a beautifully rich decision space if you're the frogs. If you're the frogs, you can happily work from a peaceful perspective, just farming points turn after turn. Or if they want to attack you and turn your tokens militant, guess what? They can actually add a frog warrior to any clearing that has a militant token each and every turn. So So pick your poison. And me as the frog player is going to be absolutely happy to play however you'd like. Do you want me to play a fast moving militant style? Sure, let's battle. Let's flip all of those tokens. That's wonderful. Do you want some frog cards? Well, why don't you go and turn them peaceful? Let me score points when I integrate and spin the matching clearing card and just shovel those points my way. The other really interesting aspect about the militant side of these tokens are in your birdsong. After allowing everyone to reconcile with you, you now take every one of those militant tokens and cover the natural suiting of that clearing. So imagine the effects there. If somebody decides to not help you score more points and allows these clearings all of a sudden to just turn frog, and maybe you're the Eerie. Imagine the havoc that you could wreak on their decree. And you as the frogs actually have a power each and every turn on top of all of this to flip one suit's tokens over completely to militant. So strategically, you could absolutely rain on the Eerie's parade by going after a particular suited clearing that they really need to operate in. Imagine you're the Woodland Alliance. You need to gain frog supporters to work in frog territory. This could mess with the keeper's retinue. I'm no meta root expert, but on the surface, it looks like this could be disastrous for a lot of factions that don't deal with those militant tokens when they need to be dealt with. And I'll say, at least the way it stands now, getting these tokens out on the board aren't tough. First of all, the Lilypad
Diaspora
are swimmers, just like the otters. They can use waterways to their advantage as paths, so that allows their mobility to get around the map a little bit easier than most factions. And on top of that, to actually place a token, all they need to do is discard a matching clearing card to do so, or rule the clearing. In my limited testing, I found it not particularly difficult to get those tokens out on the board, especially if you're also being handed cards over and over again from other people trying to reconcile with you. On top of that, as you get more of these tokens out, your card draw goes up at the end of your turn. I guess I would describe the Lilypad
Diaspora
as a conundrum. This is a difficult faction to try and deal with. You basically have to pick your poison, and you hope all the other players at the table understand the mission here, which is to, I guess, early beat back their ability to spread to a militant power, and throughout the entire game beat back their peaceful tokens and try to get frog cards so you can actually remove them all together so they can't score in chunks. Now, as a player of the frogs, wow, that's a fun, rich decision space. In already an incredibly dynamic game where you have to read and react, a faction where your goal changes significantly based upon how people play against you, and there is a counter. Now, I will say the Achilles heel are one of the things that are still up in the air, which are these frog cards. So the frog cards are needed to actually get rid of any of your tokens. However, some of those frog cards effects can have some effects on you. There is a frog dominance card, which you can't use. So the more dominant you are, the higher chance that can be used against you. There's an Incite Conflicts card, which actually I think it has changed. So the newest version of Incite Conflicts, I'll read here, force the
Diaspora
to battle in any clearing. If a peaceful frog token is there, flip it to militant. There's another called Peace Talks, remove all
Diaspora
warriors from one clearing. If a militant frog token is there, flip it to peaceful. There's a frog ambush card, and one that actually just went through a really interesting change. The version I have is laborers, which I'll read this, and I saw this and I thought, wow, this is pretty insane. On your turn, peaceful frog tokens with your pieces are your crafting pieces. I mean, imagine a bunch of frog tokens sitting out there and you happen to be sitting in those. That is incredibly powerful. However, as of this morning, when I got another email, they've changed it probably for the better, where it is clearing specific. So there's rabbit laborers, mouse laborers, and fox laborers. On your turn, peaceful frog tokens in rabbit clearings, for example, are your crafting pieces. Now, it does remove the need for you to be in those clearings, which might be just as impactful. I don't know. Regardless, these frog cards are pretty awesome in general to go ahead and get, and it's going to be a really tough decision for you to have to spend them to remove a token. I want to reiterate, though, that you as the Lilypad
Diaspora
have no way of getting these cards or using these cards. So their power is lost on you. It's just used against you. So the Lilypad
Diaspora
or frogs are the Swiss Army knife. I mean, they can go in and be the militant, aggressive faction, or they can be the sneaky behind the scenes, just piling up points based upon peaceful tokens spread all around the map. Regardless, they are a game state changer. I think they're going to be an attention hog and something that needs to be paid attention to early and often, especially for the factions I had named earlier who really don't want those clearings changed to frog. And if the frogs are a Swiss Army knife, the bats or the Twilight Council are more of a scalpel. Twilight Council, in my mind, at least in their current state, is much less flexible. They have one mission in the woodland, and it's to promote peace to their benefit. They are some lily-livered politicians that want to win the game by putting down assemblies and using them to their advantage, and maybe even change the rules to them in the middle of the game to suit their benefit. What does that sound like? The main hook is the aforementioned assemblies, and there are some interesting aspects that we'll go over right now. First and foremost, they are a pain in the ass for aggressive factions, because when you want to battle in those clearings, you have to discard all of your cards that match that clearing. If you are an opponent faction and you want to try your hand at passive aggressive diplomacy, you can use the assembly process instead of battling in any clearing that has an assembly token in it. Assemblies aren't particularly peaceful per se. You still roll dice and deal hits just like battle. However, they give each party the ability to debate a little bit. Once the dice are rolled, the attacker gets the ability to discard a matching card to the clearing you're assembling in and re-roll one or both of the dice. However, the defender gets the last laugh. If they also discard a card that matches a current clearing that has at least the same number of crafting symbols on it, they too can re-roll one or both of the dice. Just like in battle, attacker gets the highest roll, and you ignore the hit maximum for the number of warriors that are in a clearing. Once again, this is diplomacy. We're arguing with our words to do damage to each other. Admittedly, you still are at the mercy of a dice roll. You are doing the mental math on whether that card is worth it or not. There's still a way to peacefully get out of this encounter before any dice are rolled or words are thrown. As a defender, you can simply concede. This allows everyone to escape the conflict while still having some dignity. Both parties get a card. The downfall to this is you as the defender have to remove all of your warriors from the contested clearing. And if you are the defender as the Twilight Council, your assembly also has to go. So anytime an assembly happens, you flip the token and it becomes active. During evening, you as the Twilight Council score 1 point for every single active assembly at that time. I haven't mentioned how you even get these things out on the board. So the Twilight Council aren't particularly mobile. In fact, there's only one way for them to move, which we'll talk about in just a second with edicts. So they rely on essentially swooping down out of nowhere and placing both warriors and assemblies. And during their daylight, they can reveal any number of cards. And for each one, you can place one assembly on a matching clearing or one warrior in a matching assembly/clearing. And at the end of evening, you get rid of all those cards, but you replenish your entire hand equal to 1 plus the number of cards that you revealed during that turn. The tricky part here I found is in your birdsong, all of those assemblies are removed if you don't have a Twilight Council warrior with them. If you're trying to spread these assemblies around and you don't have the ability to move warriors around, essentially what you would need to do is to have 2 of the same card to actually put down an assembly and a bat warrior at the same time. The other trick to that is if you want to assemble, you have to be prepared to lose them both. And if you lose them both, even though it was on its active side, you're not going to get the point at the end of your turn. So I found this a little bit difficult and was going to be a critique until I reached out to the great people over at Leader Games. And rest assured, there have been some changes to what I'm going to talk about next, which are edict cards. See, edict cards are kind of a cool way to reward you for playing the right combination of cards during your reveal. All of these edicts have a suited requirement. As of the version that I have played with, it's all the same suiting and either 3 or 4. So you need a combination of assemblies in those clearings and or revealed cards with those same clearings. I found it difficult to get these edicts out as often as I'd like. I imagine that it was a balance issue, right? Like maybe these edicts are much too powerful and the Twilight Council aren't particularly meant to have those edicts out all the time. But I just found it difficult to keep my assemblies out on the board. so I can assemble in them and score points. Some of that is negated if other people are assembling and using those, and that very well happens. But to have the control of your own destiny, you would also like to be able to assemble in these assemblies to get them to their active side to score those points. That's what I asked about, and they're on it. The edict cards have already been messed with, and they're still very much in flight. There is now a 0 cost as of right this second edict card. There might be mixed suits requirements in these edict cards. There are now edict cards that help you keep assemblies out on the board. So my biggest critique on this might be moot already. I see a ton of potential here with the Twilight Council. I think the core mechanics are spot on for a completely game-changing faction. I mean, this is definitely an aggression control faction in my mind, at least. Imagine being any of the aggressive factions that just want to push forth, command and conquer, and battle wherever they want to. And there's a bunch of assemblies sitting out there, and they have to discard all of the cards matching the suit in their hand. That is going to be a rough road to get around. However, those assemblies have to be out on the board. So I have faith that I'll have a little better ability to keep those assemblies on the board, keep those aggressive, big, crazy factions in check. In general, my other critique was the edict cards felt expensive, and that is all under review as well. So hopefully we can get those edict cards on the board and have them help to keep those assemblies on the board as well. In fact, the 0 cost edict, canvas for support. In evening, you may return any revealed cards to your hand before discarding and draw 1 extra card. This will greatly help any sort of planning that you want to do to be able to manipulate where those assemblies go and where you put warriors the next turn. I think that 1 card alone, especially it being 0 cost, will be a huge difference in the way the Twilight Council play. And I'm sure it already has in playtesting, which is probably why it's there. From what I see so far in these announced factions, they're clearly not an addition for the sake of addition. These are game-changing, meta-changing, and variety-inducing additions to this game. Both of them have this ability to change the game state and actually add variety to many of the different factions that are going to deal with clearing suits being changed or having to battle in really key choke points where there's an assembly token sitting there. Both create new mechanics that, if you don't interact with and take account for, will be the end of your game. And on that note, as a Leader Games fanboy, I couldn't be more excited. I am also really excited and wish I could have played with the maps. The marsh map, being able to expand and contract. I saw in the designer diary, possibly even contracting to 9 clearings, but expanding for the 5-player game. I think that's beautiful. And then Sam's Gorge map, that thing just looks brilliant and wonderful. I am so excited. And if you made it this far, I really appreciate you being here. Have yourself a great day.